welcome to my channel. My name is Maddie, and today I will be reviewing From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. I don't ever do book reviews unless I feel really strongly about a book, and I felt so strongly about From Blood and Ash that I had to talk about it. I just finished this book a few days ago. I had been putting it off for two reasons, one of which is that this is an intense fantasy book, and fantasy books can be hard for me to get into. That's why I typically try to avoid them. However, even though this is fantasy, it is Jennifer L. Armentrout, so I've been really wanting to read it because of that, because she is one of my favorite authors. So I knew I was going to get to it someday. I just had to be in the right mindset to read a fantasy, and in the past I hadn't been ready for that yet. I also kept putting this off because this series is not completed yet, and what I've been trying to do is wait until a series is complete before starting this series, because what I always have to do is reread the books in this series that I've already read in order to remember everything that has happened so far in the series before I can move on to further books. So I try to do that with this series, but I just couldn't wait any longer, so I went ahead and just started it anyway, even though the series is not completed yet. And I am beating myself up for putting this book off for so long because, oh my gosh, this series is my new obsession. I have already started the second book. I'm reading it right now because I could not wait. I cannot put off the rest of this series. I need to read all the books that are out as soon as possible because I loved this book so much. So I have a lot of things to say about this book regarding things that happen in the plot, which I'm going to talk about spoilers in the second half of this video. So if y'all have read this book, you can stick around for that if you want to hear my spoilery thoughts on this one. But in the beginning of this video, for those of you who haven't read this book, I'll keep it spoiler free. And hopefully I'll entice you to read this one because I'm telling you, you gotta try it out. So let's just get into it. So first, going over what this book is about. So it is a fantasy book. Like I said, this is an adult fantasy. At first, I thought it was YA because on Goodreads, it's listed under YA. This is not young adult. There is some scenes in this book that make it to where it is impossible for it to be young adult because they are way too explicit. So please don't go into this thinking that it's young adult. This is definitely an adult book. But anyway, our main character is Poppy, and she lives the role as the maiden, which means that she is sheltered from the outside world. She can never be looked at. She has to wear a veil over her face because she's not allowed to be seen. She can't be spoken to or touched by anyone besides her guards and some members of the royalty. And she is awaiting the day of her ascension, which is something that the kids and teenagers of this world go through. And the ascension is pretty much where they get into the position where they can be deemed worthy by the gods of the world. And after this ascension, they become immortal. And so Poppy has very little knowledge of what actually goes on during the ascension, but what she does know as her role as the maiden is that her ascension is deemed to be able to save the kingdom. Circumstances make it to where she needs a new guard, so her new guard is Hawk. Her and Hawk become closer, and Hawk really influences her to question everything she's ever known about her position as the maiden as well as her kingdom. And she starts to become even more intrigued by Hawk, but she can't have him because of her position. She is unobtainable. She's not allowed to form outside relationships, including romantic relationships. So Hawk is completely off limits, but he really tempts her, makes her want to just leave behind her role, defy her kingdom so that she can be with him. So let's go into my non-spoilery thoughts. So like I said in the beginning of this video, fantasy books are really hard for me to get into, and that was the case with this book. I had a really hard time getting through like the first 3 chapters, and this is the one thing that is a fault of the book, and I've heard other people say that they didn't like this as well. The start of the book is info dumping. In the first few chapters, a lot of information is being thrown at you pertaining to the world and how it works, and it was just a lot all at once. It did feel very info dumpy. What I do like is when I'm reading like a fantasy book, I like when information about the world is kind of sprinkled throughout the book instead of just being thrown in just one chapter, paragraph after paragraph. that's just too much. It's like information overload. I need the information to be fed to me slower. And unfortunately, this book, it just was info dumpy in the beginning, which I kind of let slide, especially because the book gets way better and better later on. I let that slide a little, also because I believe this is Jennifer L. Armentrout's first like real fantasy book. She does write a lot of urban fantasy, but I don't think she's ever written I guess you would call this like a high fantasy, kind of like a Lord of the Rings-esque kind of fantasy. So because she hasn't really delved into this like kind of intense fantasy before, I can forgive it because I think she's just not completely used to this genre yet. So I did let that slide, and I could also forgive it, like I said, because the book just gets better and better later on, that I just forgot about how info dumpy it was in the beginning because I quickly became really immersed in it. After all the information overload on the world was over with, it just got better. This book really goes over the theme of isolation and how isolating yourself can be so damaging. Poppy has to live an isolated life because she is forced to. The Duke and Duchess of her kingdom will not allow her to speak to pretty much anyone besides her guards. She can't form a lot of friendships. She has to wear a veil. No one is allowed to see her face, which is just bizarre. Can you imagine living a life where so many people don't even know what you look like? That has to be so lonely. And I really related to her despair of living a life that is so isolated. She didn't like it. She wanted to get to know other people on a personal level. She wanted to talk to them. She wanted them to be able to see her face. It was very hard for her to isolate herself, but she had to because that was the rules. I, for one, tend to isolate myself a lot. I could still relate to Poppy's feelings on that because even though sometimes, like, I do want to be myself, I don't want to go out, I still feel those, like, you know, lonely feelings that come with isolating yourself for too long. So I can completely understand what she's going to regarding that, and I will talk about more of that part of her character in the spoiler section for sure, but I'll mention here that that was a part of her character I really liked because it was sadly so relatable. The romance in this book is just incredible. Jennifer L. Armentrout, dang, she knows how to write a good romance. All of her romances are so good. This book was no exception. It was just outstanding. One of the best romances I've read in a really long time. I think Hawk is just the perfect guy for her because he really encourages her to think for herself, which is something no one has ever influenced her to do, but he really wants her to just start thinking for herself, thinking about what she wants and not what the kingdom wants her to do, because she's her own person. She can make her own decisions and she has her own mind and she can think for herself and what she wants. He just kept encouraging her to do that, and that made her feel, for one, less alone, and it also made her feel understood. He was such a great influence on her. The kingdom might not think so because they would look at that as treasonous for him to encourage her to defy the kingdom and go against her role, but I, for one, thought he was just so good for her. And their chemistry together is so great. They have a lot of banter together. They argue a lot. I wouldn't call this like an enemies to lovers romance, but they do bicker a lot. And a lot of their dialogue is just so good and so funny. And the reason I found out that this is not a young adult book is because there are spicy scenes in here. Very good spicy scenes between them that I just ate up. Like, I'm reading the second book right now and I'm like, I hope we get similar scenes with them in that book. So far I haven't gotten to any scenes with them like that yet, but I'm like, I want to read more of that just because they're just so well written and their chemistry is that strong that I really feel the moment in those scenes. I just love them. I'm hoping the rest of the romance in these books will be just as good as what it was in this book, but I have a good feeling. I can't wait to keep on following their story and them together. So this book has a lot of plot twists. It has more than one plot twist, and I will go over this more in my spoiler section and talk about what all those plot twists were. But I do have to say here, I caught the plot twists in this book, which is something I'm never able to do. I have expressed before how terrible I am at catching plot twists before they happen. That's why plot twists always work on me, because I never see them coming. I'm so bad at picking up on foreshadowing. It just kind of like goes over my head most of the time. But in this book, I picked up on all the foreshadowing, which blew my mind because I'm never able to do that. And I was even mad that I caught the plot twist because I was like so excited that I did. Even though I saw them coming, the plot twists when they happened were still shocking. So if you love plot twists, you will love this one because there are a lot of them and they're pretty good. So I think that's all I have to say in my non-spoiler section of this video. I did give this book 5 out of 5 stars. Very well deserved 5 out of 5 stars. I loved all of it. Like I said, I could forgive the info dumping in the middle because I just love the book overall as a whole. So that's why I'm still giving it 5 stars. Please pick it up if you haven't yet. I think it's definitely worth reading. It's popular for a good reason. All right, enough rambling. Now we're gonna ramble some more in the spoiler section. So if you haven't read this book yet and you plan to, definitely leave so I don't spoil you, because I would hate to do that. So thanks for watching up until this point if you're leaving right now, and let's just get into the discussion. Putting the book right there because it's super heavy and I don't want to have to hold it up for the rest of this video, so we're just gonna leave it right there. Okay, starting at the beginning. So in the beginning, Poppy goes to the Red Pearl, which is, we find out it's actually like a brothel. This was my first little indication that this was not a young adult book, because once I figured out what this place was, I'm like, oh, you wouldn't see this in a YA, I think. So that was very jarring. But anyway, this is where she meets Hawk, and when they first meet, they kind of have a moment. They start like making out, like kind of touching each other and all that, which I was kind of like, all right, that's fine. At this point in the book, we didn't know much about them yet. We didn't know a lot about them as individual characters yet, so I couldn't like root for their relationship yet. So I wasn't really feeling anything when they first met. And I let it all slide because I felt like we were going to get more of them later on in the book, but oh boy, did I feel for them later on once their relationship really got building. Also, I knew immediately when Hawk was introduced that he was the love interest, even before they started making out, because I feel like Jennifer L. Armentrout, all of the heroes in her book are all the same. They all have a very cocky personality. They all have a very teasing personality. And every single one of them seems to love to pick on the main characters of her books. All in good fun, of course. And Hawk is all of that. And that's why I knew immediately. I'm like, oh yeah, this is the love interest. This is the very blueprint male love interest that is in all of Jennifer L. Armentrout's books. So Hawk has to leave the Red Pearl, and he asks her to wait there for him. She doesn't. I was like, girl, you should have waited, because Hawk was so charming. But of course she leaves, and for good reason too, because she wasn't supposed to be out in the first place. So probably a good idea that she did go back home. But fortunately, she was going to meet Hawk later on, which I was pretty sure that was going to happen. We also get to know more about her guard, Victor. I really liked Victor. I love how he's like a father figure to Poppy. I also really love that he teaches her how to fight and how to defend herself. It really boggled my mind why the Duke and Duchess wouldn't allow her to learn how to fight with weapons and defend herself, because if they are so adamant at keeping the maiden safe, why wouldn't they not want her to know how to defend herself? I feel like that would be very useful to keeping her alive. So I could never understand why they never wanted her to wield a weapon, but like, okay, I'm really glad Victor did teach her how to fight, because there was a lot of situations that come up later on in the book where she needed to defend herself or else she was going to die. So those lessons became very useful. And I also love how their lessons drew them closer together. It was so sweet. I really love the kind of father-daughter relationship they had. So in this world, there's these creatures called Craven. I kind of equate them to zombies. To me, in my mind, they are very equivalent to how zombies are, so that's kind of how I imagine them. And they are mortals who are bitten by Atlanteans. I said that in quotation marks because you know why. And basically their bodies like start to decay and they attack people, and when they bite them they also turn into Craven, and the only way to stop them from turning into Craven is to kill them. And what I love that Victor and Poppy do is they give people who are bitten by Craven dignified deaths, because the kingdom, what they do when someone is bit by a Kraven, they burn them. And they put on a show about it, like burning witches, like they used to do back in Salem, back in the day. Which is horrible, because these were once people. They deserve to die in a way that doesn't humiliate them. So I really, really love how Victor and Poppy will go to these people's homes and kill them in a way that is dignified and not put on display. That is really kind of them. I think it really speaks to Poppy's character, how kind she can be. She can be fierce, for sure, but she is willing to give these people a dignified death, which they deserve, and I think that was so kind of her. And so the first kind of unexpected death that happens in this series is one of, I think it was one of the ladies in wait, named Melissa, I believe. She dies, and she is actually murdered, and when she is found dead, she is found with 2 puncture marks to her neck. And that was very interesting. Obviously sad that she died, of course. I'm not saying that was interesting. But what is interesting is that she had like fang-like bites in her neck. And that was the first moment that made me suspect that there were vampires in this world. Which I ended up being right. So that was pretty cool. When we start learning more about the Atlanteans and how they have fangs, I was like, are the Atlanteans vampires? And as events unfold, we find out that yes, I was right. They are vampires. Getting a little ahead here. But that was like the first instance where I kind of figured that there are vampires in this world, which I always love books with vampires, so I was not complaining. And then the next death that occurs is Poppy's guard, Rylan. Which, even though we hadn't known a lot about Rylan before, because this still happened pretty early on in the book, I was really sad when he died. He seemed like a really nice guy, so that was really upsetting. When that happened, I was like, oh no, he seemed so nice. He seemed like a character that I would have liked to continue to get to know, but he dies so early on, which is terrible. And he is killed by I think he was struck by an arrow by this guy who is trying to kidnap Poppy. And he fails, which I want to say, like, in the moment when that happened, I was like, oh, that's a good thing. We don't want her kidnapped. Now, looking back, I would have liked her to be kidnapped and taken out of the situation she's in, but she wasn't. And her defensive training made it to where she was not taken because she fought him off, which was great. And so because Rylan died, Poppy needs a new guard. So Hawk becomes her guard. And Hawk has been a guard at the Kingdom of Solace for quite a bit. He came from the capital on good recommendations. So because he had such a good reputation, he gets the job as Poppy's guard. And I love that scene where Hawk formally becomes Poppy's guard because he says something that's so sweet. So I'll like read it straight from the book. So the Duke, which we don't stand the Duke. The Duke sucks. I'm so glad the Duke died. Jumping ahead again here, but I am so glad he died because he was awful to Poppy. So as we know, Poppy has scars from a Kraven attack that she got when she was little. When the Kraven attacked her family, where her parents died and all that. She got scars down her face, and parts of her other body is also scarred. So because of this, the Duke says half of her face is a masterpiece, the other half a nightmare, which is terrible thing to say. But Hawk responds with, both halves are as beautiful as the whole. And I feel like this is the moment where Hawk completely won me over, because that is so nice, especially because she's been told by the Duke over and over again that her scars are ugly, that half of her is pretty, but the other half is just like, what do you say, a nightmare. And Hawk comes along and is like, all of her is beautiful. Like, both halves are as beautiful as the whole. And this did really affect her. This made her feel really good. It was super sweet. And that was the first moment with Hawk that I completely swooned and was so on board with him. And I knew he was going to be good for Poppy. And so Poppy tries not to speak to Hawk. She is completely silent for a lot of the times that she's with him because she is afraid that he will recognize her voice and recognize her as the girl that he ran into at the Red Pearl. And she doesn't want to get in trouble for having been at the Red Pearl, and is afraid that Hawk will tell on her to the Duke, which is understandable. But I was like, girl, you can't just never talk to him. Like, he's your guard. You're going to be around him all the time. So I knew that was not going to work out, and I'm pretty sure she also knew that that was kind of like impossible. Eventually she does end up talking to him, and as we find out later on, Hawk did actually know the whole time that Poppy was the girl that he met at the Red Pearl. There was no use in her ever having to not talk around him, but she did for a while until she finally gave in. And so we find out that when Poppy does something that the Duke doesn't like, he actually he hits her, which this part was like really, it was really dark. It's never a comfortable situation reading about a moment of abuse, ever, as I think most of us feel towards those situations. But the scene with the Duke hitting Poppy with his cane and also kind of making her undress to do it, it's like, it's so unsettling. And it was really upsetting to read about. This was a major moment in the book where I really started to believe that the kingdom of Soulless was on the wrong side of things. I started to believe that they were actually the villains and not the Atlanteans, because so much leading up to this moment where the Duke hits her made me also question their intentions. But the fact that they abuse Poppy, the fact that they keep her isolated, it really, really made me suspicious that they were the ones up to no good and had ill intentions. Because so many of the royalty in this kingdom, a lot of their characteristics were just so bad. And I really felt like this scene was one of the major scenes that made me believe that things are not as they seem, which that kind of foreshadowing I picked up on. And we find out later on that that gut feeling I had was right. They are not the good guys of this story, and the Atlanteans are. We'll get into more of that later, but yeah, this scene really made me believe that they were the bad guys because of how awful the Duke was to Poppy, how he abused her and humiliated her like that. So disgusting. And we also find out that Hawk lost a brother. His brother didn't die, but he has a brother that he lost. And I knew this was going to come back up and be relevant later on. I picked up on that and I was like, we're going to find out more about that. And we did. One of my favorite scenes is when Hawk and Poppy go to the garden and go into the willow tree and have their moment in there. Loved it. It was, it gave me such strong feelings. Made me swoon. And I love how, because the garden was a place where 𝑤𝑖𝑙𝑙 was killed, it leaves Poppy with a lot of bad memories pertaining to the garden, when the garden was a place where she always loved to go to. It was like her safe place. She had a lot of good memories there, but 𝑤𝑖𝑙𝑙's death kind of tainted that. And so for a while, she didn't want to go back there because of those bad memories associated with the garden. But Hawk tells her that they should go to the garden so they can make a new good memory there. And he tells her that places that are associated with bad memories, you can go there and make good memories in order to cancel out the bad memories. And I really like that. I feel like that's very true nowadays. I'm sure we associate some places with bad memories, but we can make good memories there and give the place a new good meaning so we don't have to associate them with the bad memories. And so to give her a new good memory there, he takes her into the willow tree and they have really good conversations in there. And Poppy asks him to kiss her. And this was their kiss that finally made me like swoon for them completely. Their first kiss, I was like, not so much, because they had just met each other. But at this point, their relationship had been blossoming so much that I was all for the kiss they shared there. It was so sweet, and I was so glad it finally happened. And so when they're leaving the willow tree, they run into Victor, and I'm bringing this up only because I thought this scene was so funny. So Victor and Hawk start fighting because he catches on to what they were doing in there. He knows what's going on between them, and so Victor and Hawk start fighting over that. And I love this scene because while they're fighting, Poppy is just going back and forth as they're insulting each other. Like, Hawk will throw an insult, and she'll be like, Hawk! And then Victor will fight back, and she'll be like, Victor! And it was, I don't know why that was so funny. She just kept, saying their names as they insulted each other with, such, bafflement. and shock and like repulsion that they were like insulting each other. To me, it was so funny. I was laughing. I gotta admit, I was laughing, and I don't laugh in my books really often. So in the next scene that happens, the Duke dies, which I was like, hallelujah. I hate feeling happiness when a character dies, but I mean, the Duke was awful. We don't care for him. So of course, I was glad when he died. And Poppy later admits that she was glad that he died too, which she should be, because that was her abuser. So she has every right to feel that way. And the Duke dies because the dissenters are attacking. And as we know, the dissenters are the allies of the Atlanteans who fight on the Atlanteans' behalf. And so they start a riot. They start killing the ladies and lords in wait, some of them. And I believe they also kill some of the Ascended as well. They just like go on a murder spree. And sadly, Victor dies, and that was, oh my god, that was hard to watch. That was devastating. I loved Victor. I was so sad for Poppy, because that was, like I said, we know the relationship as like a father-daughter relationship. That was like a father to her, and she had to watch him die. It was terrible. And also in that scene, one of the best moments, when Poppy kills the Lord ''may'sine, I believe, who was someone else who was also terrible to her, just as bad as the Duke. He condoned the Duke's abuse towards Poppy, encouraged it, was there to watch it. Super awful, horrible dude. Was glad she killed him. And it was so deserving, because what the Duke said after Victor dies was so inappropriate, so terrible, so disgusting. I will read it here so we have some context. So after Victor dies, the Lord says, "I do believe our maiden has also crossed a certain line with her royal guards. I don't think her lessons were at all effective." Excuse me. Saying that she crossed a line with her guard. Because even though she has to be around her guards all the time, she's still not allowed to like form really deep relationships with them, which she already has. She already, at this point, had a really deep relationship with Hawk. But she also had a really strong connection to Victor as well. So the Lord is commenting on this and be like, oh, I mean, because she's so torn up about Victor's death, he's like, oh, well, they certainly had a strong relationship, which should have never happened. This ticks her off so much that she hacks his body into pieces. And it was so epic. I'm like, yes, girl. Reading about her rage in the scene, it was so well written. You really, really felt her anguish and hatred and loathing toward the Lord, which she had every right to feel based on his comment. She just goes berserk. And it was epic. Another death I loved to see, because the Lord was just as bad as the Duke, and he deserved to die, and Poppy just went at him without a second thought. She can be fierce. She's kind. She is a kind character, but she can get back at someone if she wants to. And I really love the juxtaposition between those two characteristics a lot. They really work for her. And so because of the dissenter attack, it puts Poppy in danger. So she's going to the capital where the queen and king live, because she'll be more safer there. So Hawk and some other guards guide her on her journey of taking her to the capital. I really love the scene where they stop in the woods and her and Hawk are lying together, and I don't know how to say this in the most like tamer term, so I'm just gonna be straightforward. Really love the scene where he gets her off. I loved it so much. It really proved how close they had gotten, that she felt comfortable with letting him do that, which is something that she wouldn't have allowed before, so it really spoke to her character growth. Loved every second of it. It was so well written. It did its job. It left me satisfied. Loved it. Loved it so much. And aside from that, something else I also loved in this scene is how Poppy finally admitted to Hawk that she is very unhappy about her situation of being the maiden, that she doesn't want this role anymore. I was really happy to see her finally admit that to him, which he's very satisfied to hear that, because that's what he had always believed, that she didn't love the situation she was in. So that was another instance of really great growth from her. So they arrive at New Haven, which is this town, and what I found suspicious, and I picked up on is how Hawk was so fine with just leaving her alone with the citizens of this town, which he's her guard, so he should be watching over her more, and he knows the danger she is in, but he just takes off, leaves her alone with some people in this house, and is just fine with it. And I'm like, that's odd. That's a little sus. And I had a good right to be suspicious, as we're gonna get into in a little bit. Okay, now talking about my favorite chapter. One of my favorite chapters of all time in any book ever. I'm not even kidding. I loved this chapter so much. So excited to talk about. And that is the chapter where Hawk and Poppy are in the room that Poppy is staying at in Hawk's friend's house. And just so we have the full context of why I love this chapter so much, I will read this like entire page right here. I'm not even kidding. Just because this isn't only my favorite chapter, this is like my favorite page out of any book I've like ever read. This page right here, page 382. I'm gonna read it all. We're gonna do it. And so this is after Poppy asks Hawk if she will stay the night with him in her room. And Hawk goes on to say, "I'm not just going to hold you. I won't stop at kissing you. My fingers won't be the... My need for you is far too great, Poppy. If I stay, you will not walk out this door, the maiden." I shivered at the bluntness of his words. They weren't a shock, but his need was. I didn't see myself as someone who could be the object of something so fierce I'd never been allowed to. "I know," I repeated. "He took one more step toward me. Do you truly, Poppy?" I did. And it was strange to know myself and be so certain when I'd spent so long not knowing myself, never really being allowed to discover who I was, what I might like or dislike, what I'd want or need. But I knew now. I had known the moment I asked him to stay. I knew what the consequences could be. I knew what I was and what was expected of me, and I knew I could no longer be that. It wasn't what I wanted in life. It had never been my choice. But this I wanted. Hawk was who I wanted. This was my choice. I was reclaiming my life, and it had started long before him, when I demanded to be taught how to fight, and when I made Victor include me when he went out to help the cursed. Those were significant steps, but there had been smaller ones along the way. In a way, they were even more important. I'd been changing, evolving just like the gift I was forbidden to wield but remained determined to use. It was in every adventure and risk I took. It was in my desire to experience what I'd been told was not for me. That was why I'd initially stayed in the room at the Red Pearl with Hawk. It was the way I'd met the Duke's stare and smiled at him when I'd been unveiled. It was when I'd spoke to Lauren for the first time, and when I went out to the rise. My evolution kept me quiet as the Duke delivered his lessons, and when I sliced Lord Mazine's arm and hand and head from his body, I'd been cutting through the chains I never chose to wear. I just hadn't realized it then. There were so many little steps over the years, and especially in recent weeks. I didn't know when it had finally happened, but I knew one thing for certain. Hawk wasn't the catalyst, he was the reward. Talk about entire development happening in one single page. That is it. This was the moment where I really felt how strong Poppy's development was, how much she's overcome, and how much she's improved, how much of a better understanding she has of the situation she's in and how horrible it was. I also the reason I love this page so much is that it just spoke to me on such a personal level. I cried while reading this. Absolutely cried. It makes me want to cry again, honestly, because like I touched on in like the beginning of this video in the non-spoilery section, I've been in a very similar situation to where Poppy is. I have self-isolated myself. I also at times felt like I had to isolate myself against my will. There has been kind of, and I won't go into too much of it because this isn't a personal video, this is a book review, but I have been in situations where I kind of was influenced to have to isolate myself and not let people in for specific reasons. And because of that, that's why I feel such a connection to Poppy's character. And reading this book has been hard because it hits so deep, and that's something I'm really trying to overcome right now, is my feelings towards feeling kind of forced to have to isolate myself, and I do read books for escapism, but every so often I'll read a book where it just like, it really reminds me of the situation that I'm in. And I did have that feeling with this book, especially reading this page right here. It really reminded me of what I'm going through right now. But at the same time, it made me feel so understood by Jennifer, because of course she wrote this character, so she understands people who are isolated and what they're going through. I really felt understood by her, and that means a lot. It really means a lot to feel validated for what you're going through. Even though it's not directly, it's through a book, I still felt that validation that what I'm going through is something that should be recognized and is something that's okay. It's like okay to feel that way. And I really love that. So that's why this page made me cry, but it also made me feel understood, which I love. And also because I've kind of been forced to feel isolated. I have not made a lot of relationships, and in the moments where I have made relationships when I shouldn't have, I could never deny that it didn't feel good and it didn't feel right. And I've been in that similar situation with Poppy, because she feels like Hawk is so right for her, even though she shouldn't be with him because she's not supposed to. I've been in those similar situations with others, both like platonically and romantically, where I wasn't supposed to have any association with them, but it felt so right. And it felt like they were like the reward for everything I'd gone through. And that's the way Poppy feels about Hawk in that scene. And so that's why that chapter, it hits so hard. And it's definitely like one of the best chapters I've ever read. It gives chapter 55 from A Court of Mist and Fury a run for its money. That's how great this chapter was. And it was also great because it's the first time that Hawk and Poppy get down to it, and every single bit of that scene was awesome. Their relationship has just paid off so much. It was so rewarding to see. It was so sweet, and I love how after it's over, Hawk tells Poppy, like, please don't forget about this. Always remember that this happened. That was very significant, and I picked up on kind of what he was meaning in that moment, because as we know, Hawk is not who he seems. And I think that even though Poppy was bound to find out the truth about him, he wanted her to not let the truth about him taint that moment they had. He didn't want her to have any negative feelings towards their first time after she found out the truth. And I thought that really spoke to his true feelings toward her so much. And so let's get into that. The truth about Hawk. I saw this coming. I saw it coming. I knew Hawk was Atlantean. I just called it a long time ago. There was so much foreshadowing to it, and I was like, yes, I knew it. I was so proud of myself. This was when I was so proud of myself for picking up on the plot twist. And let's talk about the foreshadowing, because I feel like Jennifer L. Armentrout nailed the foreshadowing in this book. It was like, it was easy to pick up on, but it was also so fun to pick up on, because every little thing Hawk does, it just made me feel like, that's really weird. That's kind of suspicious. Like, he would do little things, and it's one of those cases where, because these very, like, little, somewhat, it would seem insignificant things about him are brought up, it makes it more suspicious, because I'm like, why are these things being brought up? They must play into something, and they definitely did. And so, here's all that I picked up on. Poppy feeling how pointy his teeth are when he kisses her neck points to him being a vampire. And we do know that the Atlanteans are somewhat kind of like vampires because they have fangs. So I'm like, that's odd. Poppy comments on how he seems older than he seems. He feels like he's kind of like beyond his years. Points to him being a vampire because vampires are supposed to be immortal and they can have lived hundreds of years, which we find out that Hawk is 200 years old, so that makes sense. He has a natural sight. When him and Poppy are in the willow tree, it's very, very dark, and Hawk can like pick out where the bench in the tree is, and Poppy is like, huh, I wonder how he can see that. It was never stated that the Atlanteans had good eyesight, but I found the fact that Hawk had good eyesight, and I figured it must be something that the Atlanteans had, and so that's also where I was like, yeah, he's probably Atlantean. I'm telling you. He moves fast. There's a lot of instances where he has like super speed, where like he'll be standing in one place and then Poppy will notice that he's not standing there anymore. She's like, huh, how did he move so fast? Girl, we know. He only half smiles because he doesn't want to show his fang. And this was a big thing that I noticed. He disappears during the dissenter attack on Solus. I picked up on that. I'm like, why is Hawk not here? Why can Poppy like not find him? I found that so suspicious. It made me think, he's probably with the Descenders attacking the kingdom. So that was all the foreshadowing that I caught up on. I always felt like something was up with Hawk. I just knew this guy was not who he seemed. So I was very, very pleased to find out that I was right. That was super, super satisfying. I also did predict that Hawk was Prince Castiel. I don't know if there was like a lot of foreshadowing to that. There probably was, I just didn't see it. It was more of like just a random theory I had, like, this book would be more interesting if Hawk was the Dark One, which the Dark One is the Prince of Atlantia. That would make this book more intriguing. I can see Jennifer making it that way, and she did. So the fact that I thought that would be like an interesting plot point, that's why I predicted that Hawk was the prince. There was a little foreshadowing that Hawk was the prince when he mentions that his brother has disappeared. He lost his brother, and we come to find out that Hawk's brother Malik was captured by the Capitol. He is being held there so that the Ascended can use his blood. And so that was like a little bit of foreshadowing that he was the prince. But yes, he is the prince. He is Prince Castiel. His name is not Hawk, it is Castiel. And so Poppy is super, super upset, understandably so, that Hawk is not who he seems. We find out that everything that Hawk has done, every move he's made, is all so he could get to Poppy and kidnap her and hold her for ransom from the king and queen as a bargaining chip for him to get his brother back. And what I believe is that the Atlanteans are the good guys. I went over this a little earlier. I do think the Atlanteans are the good guys in this story, and the Ascended and the Kingdom of Solus, they are the bad guys, because every single thing the Kingdom of Solus has done is terrible. They just don't seem like pleasant people. The Atlanteans seem like the good guys. Hawk wants to take Poppy out of the situation she's in. That is something that a good guy would do, because Poppy is in a horrible situation of being forced into isolation. Like, the Atlanteans are the good guys. I always believe that. So when Poppy was like not on their side, felt like Hawk and his whole team had kidnapped her, which they did, which isn't great. She like was not on board with them. But I was like, girl, please. They're the ones you should be with. Yes, they kidnapped you, and that was horrible. But I think them taking her out of the situation she's in is a good thing, and it's going to benefit her. So I do believe later on she will come around to being like associated with the Atlanteans and with Hawk, or Castiel. I'm going to start calling him Castiel now. We're at the plot point now where he is Castiel. So let's go with Castiel. That's super, super weird, because I knew him as Hawk for so long. But yes, I feel like everything that Castiel is doing is going to benefit her. I think him taking her out of the situation she was in is a great thing. He does not want her to be the maiden anymore because it was a bad place for her to be in. So he's helping her. And I do feel like Poppy will come around that and be okay with Castiel, but it might take some time. I can understand how she feels betrayed at first. Like, the guy did lie to her, and she has a hard time believing that anything about the relationship was real. She was starting to fall in love with him. She admits she was like in love with him, but now this kind of changes everything. Yeah, it kind of just sucked that he lied to her, and deceived her and betrayed her, but she'll come around. I know she'll come around, and her feelings for Castile will just continue to grow. So we find out that the Ascended are vampires. They're known as like vampire. So it's kind of weird because I'm like, is everyone just vampires? Like the Atlanteans are vampires, the Ascended are also vampires. Super weird. I guess everyone's vampires. And basically the ascension that happens, that's when the kids become vampires. That's what the ascension is. It's not really about giving yourself over to the gods. It's about becoming a vampire and becoming immortal. So that was super interesting. And so I believe this is a lot of information is revealed during this part, so I might be fuzzy on some things, but I believe the Ascended have to drink Atlantean blood in order to go through with their ascension. And so that's why they were keeping Poppy around, because they needed her for her blood. That's what's her role as the maiden, to be used as like cattle for the Ascended to feed off of. Super disturbing. That's why she's been kept in isolation. That's why the Kingdom of Soulless has been keeping her, to use her for her blood. That is it. Very disturbing. So here I thought, you know, the plot twists are over. That's it. The plot twists were not over, y'all, as we know. And so Poppy happily drinks Castile's blood, and I found that odd. I was like, does Atlantean blood, does it taste good to everyone, or is it just Poppy? And I didn't actually pick up on the foreshadowing to this, but I did find it notable. And I wondered if it was going to be like come into play later. We find out it does. I'll get to that in a bit. And Castile reveals more about the Ascended's motives. Taking the children of the kingdom, they feed off of their blood. Horrible. So all of the children that had been given over in what I think it was the rite, they are given over to the Ascended for them to kill and drink their blood. I was very suspicious as to what happened to the children after they were taken and given over to the kingdom, and that's what happens. Very disturbing. It was very devastating to find out the truth about that. It's something you don't want to come to the conclusion of, you don't want to believe, but it happened. We find out that Castile had been held captive by the Ascended so that they can feed off of his blood, and he was held captive for so long. He went through so much, was abused, was fed off of, which had to be like torturous for him because a lot of the Ascended was feeding off of him. So he went through a lot, and this was a moment where, even though Poppy hates him at this point, she's very mad at him, she did feel for him after hearing about what he went through, which I don't blame her. Then we get to the scene where Castile drinks Poppy's blood. I love the events leading up before this where she stabs him in the heart, and then we find out that an Atlantean can't be killed with a knife through the heart. So he lives. I figured he was going to live. Like, somehow he's going to live. Like, I felt like that scene happened too abruptly for him to just die. But she tried to stab him because she was angry with him. She fails. And so she runs out into the woods. And when Hawk meets her out there, he drinks her blood, takes it from her neck. And for some reason, this isn't very well explained. I feel like I'm kind of confused on this still. But it makes Poppy horny for him when he drinks her blood, and so they do it out in the woods. I love that scene. I love it. It was very odd, but I still loved it. I can't imagine how comfortable it would be to have sex in the snow. It's snowing when they're doing it out there. That has to be very uncomfortable, but I guess they obviously didn't mind at all, as we see. So Castile ends up killing everyone who harmed Poppy. Some of the Atlanteans, they went after Poppy and wanted to kill her because they just want to see her dead. They don't want to be like Castile and keep her for ransom. They just want to kill her. And so Castile kills everyone who tried to harm her, who tried to kill her. It was a little overboard, him having just killed everyone who tried to hurt her. It really spoke to how ruthless he is. And it's such a contrast to how we know how Hawk is. Like, I feel like, yeah, Hawk, he was capable of killing, but I don't feel like he would do it like at the drop of a hat. As Castile, man, he does not care. He will kill anyone. He doesn't have a problem with killing, which is scary. But it turns out that he will kill anyone who tries to harm Poppy, which is good because we want Poppy safe, but man, that was overboard, I gotta say. And how he nails them to the wall in the keep, oh my god, disturbing. Like, so disturbing. I would feel horrified if I was Poppy seeing that. And so the last plot twist of this book we find out is that Poppy is half Atlantean. That was something I never picked up on at all. Never was expecting. But she is half Atlantean, which makes sense now. Because we find out the real reason, kind of like I mentioned a little while ago, why the Ascended were keeping Poppy was because she is Atlantean and they need to feed off Atlantean blood to survive. So that's why they were keeping her, so that they can feed off of her eventually. And so all of that made so much sense now, and why they give her the role as the Maiden. The Maiden is like a made-up thing. They're just keeping her to feed off of. And the reason they need to feed off of her, I won't go into the full scope of the background of all this because this video is getting way too long, and I take it you guys already know all of this. But the reason that they kept her is that her blood will cause them to make more vampires. So she's going to be very useful in that regard. And so the book ends with Castiel stating that he intends to marry Poppy. Very much a cliffhanger. Now that I'm into the second book, I have gotten more detail on why he wants to marry her, what his agenda is for doing that. After I finish the second book, I'll probably do another review and spoiler review on it, so I'll go into more on his reasons for wanting to marry her in that book. But yeah, we'll leave it off right here. Wow, so I went over so much. I'm sure I've been filming for so long, but this was really fun. I really enjoyed doing a book review. When I was doing YouTube regularly, I didn't do a lot of book reviews, but I would like to do more of them. If it's something you guys want to see, then definitely let me know. Also, let me know your thoughts on From Blood and Ash. I would really love to talk about this book with all y'all, and we can like discuss it and everything. This series is my new obsession. So excited to continue reading it. Hopefully the rest of the books will be as good as the first, but so far the second book it's good. It's going good with me. Anyway, I'm gonna call it quits here. Hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more book-related videos, probably more book reviews in the future, and I'll be back really soon. Bye!